Welcome, everyone. Good morning to those of you joining from the United States. Good afternoon to everyone in Turkey and around the region. I am Defne Arslan, Director of Atlantic Council in Turkey. Thank you for joining our webinar on Turkish-Russian competition in the region, which I am delighted to be hosting in partnership with Ambassador John Herbst, Director of the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Center, and Melinda Herring, Deputy Director at Eurasia Center, who will moderate the panel today. We have a panel with distinguished guests today. I will leave it to our moderator, Melinda, to introduce our valuable panelists. The relationship between Turkey and Russia is very complex. With thorough analysis, one can find important examples of cooperation and competition from regional conflicts, such as Syria and Libya, to topics such as energy and trade. In the region we are focusing on today, Eurasia, and specifically Ukraine and South Caucasus, Turkey and Russia's interests are strongly diverged. On the contrary, Turkey's interests are much more in line with the US foreign policy goals, such as the territorial integrity of Ukraine and Georgia and their integration into NATO. I am greatly looking forward to the discussion and hope this will add to the debate and perspective on Turkey's transatlantic ties, its role in the region, and its changing relationship with Russia. Before I pass the floor to Atlantic Council Executive Vice President Damon Wilson to set the scene, I would like to share a few words. As you may have already heard yesterday, Damon Wilson is to be the President and CEO of the National Endowment for Democracy soon. We, as the Atlantic Council, are deeply proud that NED has chosen Damon Wilson for this high-level public service leadership responsibility. Damon, congratulations for this important leading mission. And with that, floor is yours. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Defna. Thank you for those kind words. It's bittersweet. I love being here to celebrate the Atlantic Council today and look forward to the future at NED. But let me just welcome our audience. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are today. And thank you for joining us. I want to give a special welcome to our guests from Ankara, from Kyiv, from Moscow. Thank you for coming together, and a special welcome to our audience members who are joining us from around the Black Sea region. As Defna said, the Turkey-Russia relationship, I think we know, has raised more than a few eyebrows in recent years, with issues such as Syria, the sale of the S-400, turning into major challenges to the Turkey-US relationship. Many on this side of the Atlantic observe Turkish foreign policy combined with domestic pressure on its democracy, and they question Turkey's intentions with Russia, whether Turkey's pulling away from its NATO allies or whether even it wants to remain part of the strategic West. And yet, this is a complicated story. It's a complicated history, including wars, numerous wars between Russia and Turkey that have shaped both a traditionally competitive relationship, but also the perceptions of each other today. A complex dynamic characterizes the Ankara-Moscow relations today, which results often in this jarring dance between competition and cooperation. So despite this controversial defense ties, Turkish troops play the major role in preventing Russian and Assad regime forces from consolidating control in northern Syria. Turkish forces prevented Moscow's proxies from taking over Tripoli in Libya. And Turkish forces backed Azerbaijan against Russia's interest in retaking territory held by Armenia. And at the same time, we've seen Turkey has been among the most vocal champions of the NATO aspirations of Georgia and Ukraine, with Ankara even concluding a strategic partnership with Kiev at the height of Moscow's intimidation campaign against Ukraine this year. And on top of this, we've seen Turkey's act to diversify its natural gas supply, cutting in half its imports from Turkey. So this Turkish-Russian relationship, it's simultaneously transactional, cooperative, competitive. So what's going on here? Today, we're bringing together top experts to look beyond the headlines to better understand the Turkish-Russian relationship with a focus on its neighborhood in this region. And we're doing so on the heels of the first high-level visit to Ankara by a Biden administration official, Deputy Secretary of State Wendy Sherman, who was just in Turkey last week. And And I'm delighted that our Atlantic Council and Turkey program and our Eurasia Center are combining forces, or rather brain power and expertise, to really tackle this issue and help us understand what's behind this dynamic. And importantly, today we bring distinguished experts from the region to offer their insights, their perspectives on this topic. So I want to thank them in advance, but I am going to leave it to Melinda. Without further ado, I'd like to pass the floor to one of our own top analysts at the Atlantic Council who will serve as today's moderator and introduce our guest properly, Melinda Herring, Deputy Director of the Eurasia Center. Over to you, Melinda.
Thank you, Damon. Good morning, good afternoon. I always say when we do Zoom webinars that you're in for a treat, but today you're in for a huge treat. We have 4 really top people with us. We're joined by Ambassador Ceylan, the former Deputy Undersecretary at the Turkish Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Dr. Pavel Felgenhauer, who is a phenomenal columnist. If you don't read his column, you must do it. He's a Moscow-based independent defense analyst and a columnist for Nova Gazeta. We're joined by Dr. Yevgenia Gaber, a foreign policy advisor to the Prime Minister of Ukraine, and our very own Ambassador John Herbst, Director of the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Center. Now, Yevgenia is speaking here today in her own capacity. She's a brilliant analyst. She is not speaking on behalf of the government of Ukraine. We have about an hour to dive into this very complicated subject, but I want to invite you, our audience, to participate. Our panelists will be taking questions. If you want to submit your question, you can go down to the Q&A function at the bottom of Zoom. You can also use @AC_Istanbul or @AC-Eurasia if you'd like to ask a question, and I will be watching. So please get those questions in when you're ready. First, I'd like to turn to Ambassador Ceylan. Ambassador Ceylan, thank you for joining us. How does Turkey view Moscow? Is it an annoyance, an aggressor, a serious regional power? And where is the relationship heading?
Well, thank you, Damon, and also thank you very much, Atlantic Council in Turkey, for arranging this webinar in a critical time frame. We are very close to the NATO summit. There will be a G7 summit before that in the United Kingdom, and Russia will certainly figure prominently in consultations that will take place at the leaders' level in Brussels. As Damon said, the Turkish-Russian relations have indeed been intriguing for many of us, for the Turks and for non-Turks, for our allies and for our partners. And it still is. So it would be rather difficult to reach hasty conclusions on the nature of these relations, but there is one fact that remains. Turkey is a member, full-fledged member of NATO. There is a perception, primarily owing to the purchase of S-400 missile batteries from Russia, that Turkey is kind of changing its course in terms of its relations with her Western allies and partners. But don't forget, from the very start, we had always supported the integration of Ukraine and our Caucasian partners into the West. And there are concrete examples of that. When you look at the events that took place. And when it comes to Ukraine, of course, back in 2014, we were preparing for the summit, NATO summit in Wales. And we were not discussing the Russian attitude. There was rather an ignorance on evolving Russian security and military strategies formulated by Gerasimov, even in the early 2000s. And they were underestimated, I think, in my opinion. And we were talking about how to include in the Wales Summit agenda. And then came March 2014. And we had witnessed the appearance of little green man on the Crimean Peninsula, which was subsequently occupied and annexed by Russia. And almost parallel to that event, we had seen Russia extending its support to separatists in the Donbas region of Ukraine. So there was a clear violation of rules-based international order by Russia, a brazen breach of its international commitments and obligations, which necessitate full respect for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine. So our course has never changed. It's rock solid when it comes to supporting Ukraine in upholding its sovereignty and territorial integrity within its internationally recognized borders. There's no doubt about it. And we have a very robust policy, which we are still pursuing, by the way, to support Kiev in its efforts to choose its own path, which would be in total compliance with the 1975 Helsinki Final Act. And we do not see eye to eye with Russia on any protracted conflict in our northern part, starting with Transnistria, Abkhazia, South Ossetia, and now Crimea and Donbas. There is a clear divergence of opinion and interest as far as Turkey is concerned with regard to that ring of protracted conflicts in our immediate neighborhood. And that will remain the case. It would be impossible for any government in Turkey to condone the aggressive attitude of Russia, the latest example being Crimea and Donbas, in our neighborhood. Let me add to that, that we had established a high-level strategic cooperation council arrangement with Ukraine in 2011. Before that, in May 2010, we established, and I was at the ministry then, a high-level cooperation council with Russia. Now, the fundamental nuance in naming these arrangements is that we added strategic, the word strategic, into our partnership with Ukraine. The same also applies to Georgia. Right from 2008, Turkey never wavered in extending her support to Georgia. Also in the military field, which was a cause of concern for Russians, and they were addressing this issue in our context with Russia on different levels. We did a lot to modernize the naval capacity and capability of Georgia. With regard to Ukraine, there was a recent high-level visit. President Zilinski visited Turkey in April this year, and a 20-point joint declaration was announced after the visit, which includes cooperation in defense industry. I'm talking about the UAV deal particularly, and the corvettes of Ukrainian Navy. But when it comes to Caucasia, it's undeniable that Turkey has vested interests in Caucasia because of affinities on a wide-ranging basis. I mean, they are our brethren. We speak the same language. They had been under the Soviet rule for 70 years. And finally, at the end of the Cold War, they were able to have their independence. So we will continue to support them for different reasons.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much, Ambassador. That was a very comprehensive answer and overview. Really appreciate that. Dr.
Thank you.
Felgenhauer, thank you so much. I'd like to turn to you. How does Moscow view its ties with Ankara? What does Russia seek to gain from the relationship? And what is the future of the relationship? Go ahead, sir.
Thank you. Well, it's a very, very complicated issue. The relations with Turkey is an example, not the only, but one of the most vivid examples of czarist foreign policy in Russia. I mean, the czar personally, the Russian leader, President Vladimir Putin, implementing his own personal foreign policy views and agenda to a large extent against the better opinion of the majority of his military, diplomats, and many other important groups of interest in Russia. President Putin has a very close bromance with the Turkish leader Erdogan. He likes him, and he believes that he can kind of, through these personal relationships, can move Turkey further away from NATO, more further away from Europe, and establish much better relations, maybe even some kind of form of alliance or something that could bring Russia its ultimate goal in the region, friendly power controlling the Straits, because the Straits, the Black Sea Straits, have been for a millennia, maybe at least, the main focus point of any kind of Russian policies in the region. Who controls the state? We fought so many wars about that, and Russia would very much like to have a control. That's more important than almost any other issue, any other regional issue. But as I said, the problem is that the Russian military establishment, the Russian diplomatic establishment, don't believe that this Putin's policy is sound. They believe it won't work. That Turkey cannot be moved, that it's going to be anyway always a NATO member, an American ally in the last resort, and that investing so much influence and actual real money into building up relations with Turkey won't work and doesn't work, and this is a squandering of resources. There is also very strong anti-Turkish lobbying groups in Moscow, very important and influential. Of course, the Armenians, which are very well represented in the foreign policy establishment, in the propaganda Kremlin machine, are absolutely, of course, anti-Turkish. There are also Kurdish lobbying groups in Russia connected to the PKK. They are not as kind of prominent in the public eye, but I know some of them, and they are also kind of working there. And of course, Rojava has a kind of semi-embassy still working in Moscow. That's the Kurdish autonomous region in northern Syria.
Wonderful.
Yes, and so as that means that in this kind of context, we don't have much of a coherent policy. We have Putin and Erdogan agreeing on something, then the Russian military and diplomats finding ways to undermine it, to prove to the Kremlin. Of course, Putin is the czar. No one can go directly in Moscow against the czar in the corridors of power. But you can try to explain to him and show him that his efforts, that all the money we spent, like selling those S-400s to Turkey, which were actually sold, paid for by the Russian budget. And this is, and that's not clear. Will Turkey, when will Turkey repay, and ever, taking into account the present financial meltdown in Turkey? That's kind of Turkey's looming on the verge of such a meltdown. So that means we don't have much of a coherent policy. We have a infighting of sorts on the issue. And that explains a lot of the incoherencies in the Russian-Turkish relationship when we come from crisis to, again, kind of close relations, and then again back to crisis.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Pavel. Yevgenia, I would love to know your thoughts. Does Zilinski and Erdogan have a bromance? And when did the Ukrainian-Turkish relationship start to warm up? Can you bring us up to speed on that, please?
Yeah, thank you, Melinda. Thank you for having me here today. Regarding your question, as Ambassador Gillian mentioned, we have the strategic cooperation since 2011, which is officially documented and officially declared in 2011. But still, I would say that 2014 was quite an important turning point for the development of Turkish-Ukrainian relations, and also for a more security dominated agenda, because previously we had some relations, but those were mostly kind of a soft issues, economic development, trade, and so on. With the start of Russian aggression in Ukraine and with the occupation and illegal annexation of Crimea, the situation changed dramatically, and it changed in several ways. First, of course, because of the Crimean Tatars, keen Turkic nation living in Crimea, and they have always been a top priority for Turkey, as well as other diasporas and other Turkic communities living abroad. So, of course, that was one of the focuses of attention for Turkey. But also because of the change in military and security balance in the Black Sea as well, because the status quo was changed completely. And if before that, Turkey used to have kind of a relative naval and military dominance in the region, that was no more a case, because with the occupation of Crimea and huge militarization of the occupied Crimean Peninsula, actually Russia started to use it as its own stronghold and kind of a power projection for a broader region. And now if we look at the general situation, what happens in the Eastern Mediterranean, in Syria, in Libya, in Crimea, presence of Russian forces and all these protracted conflicts in the Black Sea, we will see a completely different picture, which is also very important for Turkey, because basically we have on the one hand this kind of defense cooperation between Turkey and Russia on S-400, on some other issues, on energy projects. But on the other hand, Turkey is quite uneasy with what is going on, because this change in status quo is definitely not in Ankara's favor. For Ukraine, why Turkey's support is important? Well, because of course this is a NATO member, and this is not only a NATO member, but also the second biggest army. It's because of control of the Turkish Straits, and this was already mentioned today. But this is also because Turkey is one of the countries in the region who can deter Russian military buildup, and who is willing to do that without engagement of NATO, maybe without wider and broader engagement of basically US warships in the Black Sea, but still counterbalancing Russian presence. So here Ukraine came up together with Georgia and together with Azerbaijan at some point, because this is this kind of regional military cooperation, defense cooperation, and political cooperation, which can allow Turkey to, on the one hand, counterbalance Russian influence and deter Russian growing military buildup in the broader region, but on the other hand, avoid the situation when there will be kind of this militarized Black Sea with a lot of different warships coming from NATO, US, and other countries. Because we know that Turkey is quite sensitive about restrictions of Montreux Convention. So this is this point at which we started cooperating a lot. And second point, very shortly, I would also name 2019 or 2018, when Turkey could not get Patriots from NATO, and Turkey started cooperating with Russia on S-400 as well. And then sanctions followed. That was also quite an important development for Turkey and for the development of autonomous national defense industry. This is one of the priorities for the Republic of Turkey at the moment. Development of all these strategic spheres like aerospace, defense industry, self-sufficient, autonomous defense complex, not having technologies from Russian Federation because of this lack of strategic part to the partnership, and not having a possibility to cooperate with the Western partners, with NATO, because of CAATSA sanctions and exclusion from a couple of military programs. Ukraine here came up as a very nice alternative, a very nice option, because we have our own school, we have our own technologies, and we have this level of trust and political will from both sides to cooperate. So I would say that was kind of two important milestones to mention.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I know this, I didn't frame it as a serious question, but I am curious, do Erdogan and Zelensky have a warm relationship? Is there any personal chemistry there, or is it just all business?
Well, they do have this personal relationship and personal chemistry, but unlike in Russia, there is also institutional part of cooperation between Ukraine and Turkey. So we do have these personal relations, but at the same time, it's very much based on cooperation between different institutions, between military, defense, and in all different spheres. So it goes kind of in parallel tracks. This high-level political will helps a lot, but there is also this kind of more solid foundation for development of institutional sustainable cooperation in the future.
That's an interesting point. So that's a difference with Moscow that Pavel brought out. Wonderful. Ambassador Herbst, how does the US see Turkey's partnerships with Russia and with Ukraine? Can it have close relationships with both? How might the Biden administration interpret Turkey's foreign policy? Over to you.
The Turkey-Russian relationship is fascinating. As Damon pointed out, historically, Turkey and Russia, before Turkey, the Ottoman Empire and the Russian Empire, have been rivals. And Turkey was a rock-solid ally of the United States and NATO for the first 50 years of the alliance. But it is true that Putin has put a real emphasis on reaching out to Turkey since at least 2005, 2006. And with Erdogan, they've kind of hit it off. But it's also true that the geopolitical interests of both countries militate against too close of a partnership. So while Mr. Putin was courting Erdogan, the Russians kept sending jets flying into Turkish airspace, and the Turks, defending their sovereignty, shot one down. This was in late 2015. But reflecting the peculiar dynamic of the Erdogan-Putin bromance, they kind of kissed and made up 6 months later. Russia did not want that shoot down to become a real impediment to developing relations. And Erdogan, in an uncharacteristic move for a Turkish leader, essentially apologized in St. Petersburg in June of 16. But again, their interests keep getting in the way, most especially recently in the South Caucasus, where essentially the Turks stole the march on Moscow, backing Azerbaijan in its war against Armenia. I would say on the Turkish-Ukraine front, Turkey as a NATO ally, Turkey as a partner of the West, is a natural ally with Ukraine. Turkey, like Ukraine, has to worry about the Russian military buildup in the Black Sea. But I think because of the Putin-Erdogan bromance, in 14 and 15, Turkey was not so steadfast in opposing Moscow's aggression, including in Crimea. Because Turkish commercial vessels, ships and planes were landing in Crimea after Moscow took over. But then, because of other problems in the Turkish-Russian relationships, they reassert themselves. Turkey and Ukraine have developed stronger relations, most recently solidified by the visit of Zilinski and the cooperation described. And I think Evgenia is right when she talks about how Ukraine has a strong defense industry, which is a natural partner with Turkey, as Turkey also developed its own defense industry. Bottom line, this is a very complex area with overlapping interests. And I think that ultimately, the Turkish connection within NATO, with the West, Ukraine's desires to move in that direction, mean a greater Turkish-Ukrainian rapprochement, to the detriment of Ankara's relations with Moscow.
Okay, we're going to watch that prediction, Ambassador Herbst. Pavel, a question for you, follow-up question based on what Evgenia and John have just said. What does the Kremlin think of Turkey's relationship with Ukraine and its strong support for its sovereignty? Does it play any role in its military and strategic calculus?
No, sure, it's not seen very good. It's reported in Russia and reported negatively. Turkey, of course, has sold Ukraine some recon strike drones, and that's is very bad by the Russian military. Russia had acquired drones after the Georgian war in Israel, and is building them now under license. And these drones for post or Israeli searchers help Russia defeat the Ukrainian military soundly in Ilovaisk in 14 and in the Baltso in 15. And Ukraine had nothing of the sort. And under Russian pressure and influence, Israel refused to sell drones to Ukraine. But Turkey did. And that's not seen as by the Russian military as a very unfriendly move. A couple of years ago, the chief of Russian General Staff, General Gerasimov, told journalists he was boasting after a big exercise, Kavkaz. He said that we now in Crimea have missiles, anti-ship missiles that can sink NATO ships as they're passing through the Bosphorus, in the Bosphorus. So missiles based in Crimea are actually zeroed on Istanbul and the Bosphorus. So that's the Russian response of the Russian military, because they believe that Turkey is a major enemy. It has been during the Cold War, and those who are leading the Russian military are players of the Cold War. They began service then, and they believe in that as it was then. But of course, that does not actually prevent, as I said before, the top leadership to sometimes overpass their military establishments on both sides and find the ways of making deals.
Great, thank you so much. Wonderful. We have about 30 minutes remaining, and we've got a number of great questions. So we're going to switch now. I'm going to give you our questions from our audience. And I asked my panelists, please give me very short, concise answers, about 3 sentences. We call this Blitz round, and I'm going to direct a question at you. And if you talk for too long, I'm going to stop you. So here we go. I have several questions about the Istanbul Canal. So first, Ambassador Ceylan, could you tell us what the Istanbul Canal project is? And then the specific question is, what level of tension can be reached regarding the dispute over Erdogan's Canal Istanbul project? How will Russia oppose? If you could go ahead first, please, sir.
This Canal Istanbul project is under intense debate in Turkey, so its future is rather dubious. If it just happens, if they start building it and finish it, the present government, or rather the president, is saying that that has nothing to do with the Montreux Convention, but there had been some rather voices coming from Russia on that, because there is the suspicion that it is kind of an indirect way of kind of circumventing the provisions of the Montreux Convention. But let me tell all the audience that the future of this canal is still a very much a subject of a very heated debate in Turkey. And one cannot predict in full confidence that it will take place. Let's see what will transpire at the end of this process.
Wonderful, thank you. Pavel or Evgenia, any thoughts on that? Go ahead, please.
Yeah, just a couple of words more. First, when we speak about the Montreux Convention and about Canal Istanbul, it might be useful to look at the Montreux Convention itself, and it talks about in the preamble about the Turkish Straits. So it's not solely the Bosphorus actually, but also the Dardanelles. So even in case Canal Istanbul is built, and this is also a very much debated question, there probably should be another channel, parallel, artificial channel, parallel to Dardanelles, in order to make Montreux Convention unapplicable for the new Canal Istanbul. So this is one thing. That's why I believe that the Montreux Convention will still be to some extent used for the warships. But in my opinion, the Canal Istanbul is mostly about the commercial ships and commercial use, and not for the changing regime of crossing of the warships, because this is kind of a holy cow for Turkey, and it has been a holy cow for many, many years. And I think that restrictions might actually stay there, because otherwise Turkey would not just like to give away its golden card and say that we refuse or we denounce the Montreux Convention. So just in case it happens and canal is still built, I believe that for certain time for the warships, especially of the non-littoral states, the restrictions will still be in place.
Great, thank you very much.
Belinda, can I just come in, please? Just 2 sentences, because we are talking about the Montreux Convention. Now, let me say in clear terms that there are 2 fundamental pillars of international law as far as we are concerned. One is the Lausanne Treaty, and the other is the Montreux Convention of 1936. Another thing is that, remember, after the occupation and annexation of Crimea and destabilization of the Donbas region of Ukraine, we opposed Russia, and we will continue to oppose Russia on the legitimate grounds that they challenged the rules-based international order based on international law. So the Montreux Convention is part and parcel of international law. So all of us, all allies, will have to continue to respect the Montreux Convention because it's part of international law and rules-based international order. Thank you.
Thank you. Ambassador Herbst, question for you from Matt Bryza. Hi, Matt, thanks for joining us. Is there a general view in Washington that Turkey's burgeoning defense technology sector, especially its drone technology and tactics, is a strategic plus or minus for the United States?
I'm not sure that there's a set view on this in Washington. Certainly, Washington has recognized that Turkey has developed substantially economically, politically, economically, geopolitically, and in the defense sector over the past 15 or 20 years. But because there have been some tensions in the relationship, it's looked at ambivalently. So this is a question to watch.
Okay, super. Thank you so much. Next question. Does Turkey view the outcome of the Nagorno-Karabakh war as a success, seeing as it has led to Russian boots on the ground, or did it backfire? Pavel, would you like to take a crack at that, and then Ambassador Herbst?
Okay. This is kind of implied that Russia supported Armenia in the war in the Karabakh last fall. Well, actually, it didn't really. Turkey did support Azerbaijan, but Russia did not fully support Armenia. If Russia would have, most likely Armenia would not have lost most of the Karabakh. For Russia, the problem in the South-Caucasus is that the strategic overall objective is to reinstal the old Soviet imperial border and take over dominance over the entire Trans-Caucasus. That means if you have Armenia as an ally, that's okay, but you can't have Azerbaijan as an enemy, because they also should become a kind of Russian dependency or something. That means Russia was always trying to balance Armenia and Azerbaijan. And right now it's seen that we are continuing to balance it. We have our troops deployed in Karabakh as peacekeepers, and we're keeping the peace there. And that means we're controlling sort of both sides. So for Russia, it may be seen as a victory of sorts, but it's not because we supported the winning side.
Okay, great. Ambassador Herbst, you have different.
I agree with Pavel's characterization of Russian policy goals in the South Caucasus. But you know, I don't want to overstate the possibilities here. But the war may open the way to some very interesting new developments. Armenia has bet its security and even its sovereignty, you might say, on the connection with Moscow. But as Pavel just pointed out, Russia never had the same interest in Armenia that Armenia had in that relationship. And so if Armenia, as a result of this very bitter defeat, is willing to rethink its orientation, if Turkey can pivot from simply being a backer of Azerbaijan to pursuing a policy in the Caucasus that reaches out to all 3 Caucasus states, and if the United States has the wit to back the diplomacy that reduces Kremlin's interests in the region and promotes more stable relations amongst the 3 South Caucasus states and Turkey, we can see a new South Caucasus emerge. And this would be one that would reduce substantially Kremlin influence and promote stability in the region. But this requires real statesmanship in Yerevan, in Ankara, and also Baku has to be willing to go along with this, and of course in Washington.
Ambassador Herbst, a follow-up question for you on Nagorno-Karabakh from Ambassador Richard Morningstar. Hi, Dick. Thanks for joining us this morning. Is the Russian peacekeeping role in Nagorno-Karabakh an opportunity for cooperation to help reach a final resolution of the dispute, or is it a point for major tension between Turkey and Russia if Russia uses its role to maintain the new status quo in Nagorno-Karabakh?
Well, first, the status quo in Nagorno-Karabakh has changed. And Russian troop presence there, and not just there, but elsewhere in Armenia, is designed, in theory, to prevent Azerbaijan from making additional military gains, but also, of course, to make sure that Moscow's influence in the South Caucasus remains substantial, if not preeminent. So from the standpoint of Turkey, from the standpoint of the United States, I think this is a negative. But I also think from the standpoint of Armenia, it's a negative, because it solidifies already too great Russian control in Armenia. And again, if Armenia is willing to rethink its basic orientations as a result of this failure, of the failure in the war, the failure of Moscow to provide support Armenia was counting on, again, all sorts of opportunities can open up for Armenia in the South Caucasus.
Ambassador Herbst, how likely is that to happen? You said it's going to require statesmanship in a lot of different places and leadership here.
Well, to count on statesmanship in more than one or two capitals always means it's a long shot. But it's also true that the event in the South Caucasus, this past fall, this war, was a traumatic event for Armenia, perhaps an event that might produce triumphalism in Azerbaijan, I hope not, and perhaps an event that gives Turkey a way to see forward to a greater role for itself and greater prosperity and stability in the Caucasus.
Thank you so much. Okay, Yevgeny, a question for you. Could you please elaborate on the outcomes after the discussions in Vilnius among chief foreign policy and national security advisors to the presidents of the Baltic states, Poland, and Ukraine? Is there anything you could tell us?
Well, sure. Basically, this is one of the newest trends in Ukraine's foreign policy for those commentators and analysts who follow it quite closely, that we try to develop two tracks at the same time. So on the one hand, we have European integration and Euro-Atlantic integration now even in our constitution. So this is something that is not changing and that will go on for many years to come until we actually become members of EU and NATO. On the other hand, there is also this understanding that without working with our direct neighbors and with those countries who share same geography with us, same history in many respects, same threat perceptions, it would be quite difficult for us to act only with global actors and not ignoring, putting a blind eye on the neighbors that we have. So these new initiatives that we have, for example, the so-called Lublin Triangle with Lithuania and Poland, and then developing cooperation with the Baltic states, with Poland, with the other Central European states, this is something that provides us an opportunity to exchange our experience in countering hybrid aggression from Russia and also all kinds of malign external influences. And also this helps us to actually bring ourselves, make ourselves closer to NATO. And on the other part of this question, just as in addition to that, because we are speaking about Turkey today, this is why, because we are coming up with different regional platforms of cooperation with Georgia, for example, with the Azerbaijan, with Turkey in different formats. It might be drills, it might be joint naval operations at some point, it might be infrastructural even projects, but trying to create these very flexible, sometimes situational, but very practical and result-oriented formats of cooperation. And one of the latest developments in this sense was the participation of Georgia and Ukraine for the first time in history in trilateral consultations between Poland, Romania, and Turkey as NATO members, and then Ukraine as Georgia, and Georgia as non-NATO members, but still trying to move fast on this track. So this is really something to follow, and I think that this provides both our Western partners and neighbors with Ukrainian experience of real combat with Russians, because very often we even get these questions about very specific issues, how Ukraine deals with this or that problems with jamming, with trying different kind of weapons, because Ukraine is basically the only country in war with Russia on the European continent at the moment. On the other hand, we do learn a lot from those countries.
Wonderful, thank you. Ambassador Ceylan, question for you from Keith Weber. He wants to know, what is Turkey's public and private perspective on Belarus?
Oh, that's a very good question indeed. Now, with regard to Belarus,
yes, sir.
Let me put it this way, in a wider framework. First of all, it's a fact that Belarus is a rather spoiled, let me put it this way, child in Central Europe, in alignment with Moscow, and to a considerable extent with China. So there is this high influence of Russia and China over Belarus. We were trying to develop our relations with Belarus. I myself went to Belarus several times on several occasions, trying to build ties with Belarus. It is a difficult case, there's no doubt about it. And I'm sure that throughout that period, our allies and partners around Belarus tried to lure it, let's put it that way, into the Western family of nations. But there are serious obstacles as far as relations between Belarus and the West is concerned. And we were talking about values and Belarus not sharing these common values. So with regard to Belarus, what happened recently, this diversion of civilian aircraft flying from Athens to Vilnius, that is something to be strongly condemned. There's no doubt about it. There has to be an independent investigation into it by ICAO. And this is not something similar. I'm talking about MH17 flight from Amsterdam to Kuala Lumpur, and it was shut down by Russian separatists. We all know that. There's a report on it. So Belarus is also a very rather challenging case as far as you're concerned. But the point here is, of course, to try to patiently urge Belarus to remain in harmony, first and foremost, with its immediate neighborhood. We believe that it's in the interest of Belarus to follow such a course, but that will take time. It's true, that will take time. I'm sure that Poland and our Baltic allies, they are doing their best to kind of keep Belarus at least in a neutral position in its relations with Russia and China. But there are certain hard facts, historical hard facts. And every single time we know that whenever you take such steps, then there will be a Russian reaction. And behind the scenes, you also see the influence of China trying to reach Central and Eastern Europe and extend its influence in that region. Let me come back to a little bit. Just allow me to comment on that recent conflict in Nagorno-Karabakh and the ensuing developments. Now, even after the demise of the Zurich Protocols of 2009, we launched a serious process of consultation with Russia on what we could possibly do in the region with regard to Nagorno-Karabakh. There was no conflict then. The conflict was frozen. But what we were trying to do is to include Armenia into regional cooperative schemes. And particularly, we were emphasizing to try to build the railroads and highways which would connect Turkey, Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan was hesitant on it. But despite that, we were trying to convince Russia that it's also in the interest of Russia, not only from the perspective of South Caucasus, but also North Caucasus, to bring all those, republics under a cooperative umbrella. And the response was, well, that is a very interesting idea, but it's very much political. And I said, yes, it is very much political. And you have to believe that you have interests in that. But finally, now Azerbaijan has its own territory occupied by Armenia, 20% of its territory. And in the recent visit by President Erdogan to Baku, he made a call, which is good, actually. I mean, he made a call of that there's a window of opportunity now for the regional countries to try to do something to break the isolation of Armenia. That is something to be pursued. And I think it's a good target. But I'm not sure whether Russia would be in compliance with that objective, because it might think that it could lose its influence in the South Caucasus. It's a peculiar kind of thinking, but that's the mentality. It doesn't look to the economic and other gains that it might gain, but it concentrates on the strategic calculus and very much, security conscious about it, fearing that it might lose its clout over South Caucasus.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you, Ambassador. I need to move to the next question. That was interesting background. Pavel, question for you from Ambassador Sandy Vershbaugh. Thanks for joining us, Sandy. It's great to have you with us. When it comes to Ukraine and Georgia, what worries Vladimir Putin more? Closer ties between those countries and NATO, or the consolidation of democracy? I knew he was going to give you a good one.
Yes, that's a good question. Russia, of course, believes that NATO expansion to Georgia and Ukraine is no. It's a kind of casus belli for Moscow, that it should be prevented at any basically cost. It would put NATO in striking distance of Moscow and even closer to the second Russian capital, Sochi, because spends half the year in Sochi and rules Russia from there, and his Dutch is just on the legally the Georgian border. It's a border with Abkhazia. Well, anyway, it's not too close, and being so close to a NATO kind of territory, it's not good at all. Russia will not allow that to happen, at least in the present circumstances. And today, that's been said by the Russian military. It's said by the Kremlin that they believe that Russia is #1 militarily in the world. In nuclear weapons, maybe that is even so, and also in conventional, at least on ground weapons. And that the West is not recognizing these facts and is piling up sanctions on Russia and abusing Russia, and the urge to demonstrate more forcefully Russian military capabilities is growing in Moscow, which makes the situation rather unstable, and Ukraine may be one of those places.
Thank you so much. Evgeny, a question to you, please, from John Roberts. He says, is the Erdogan government seriously concerned about the situation of the Crimean Tatars? And are there any concrete examples of this issue impacting Turkish policy regarding Russia? And also, Ambassador Ceylan, if you could answer that as well. But go first, Evgeny, and then Ambassador, please.
Well, yes, I have already said the issues of Crimean Tatars is one of the most important elements of our dialogue with the Turkish partners on Crimea in particular. And here we can speak about many different dimensions. So first is, of course, the human rights violations, which are very gross and which happen every day in the occupied Crimea. So starting from searches in their homes, the ban of the Mejlis of Crimean Tatars, and we had a very strong reaction from our Turkish partners on that as well. And then up to closing mosques, schools where Crimean Tatar language is taught, and so on and so forth. So on the one hand, we have this dimension, and this is of course very important, both because Turkey always supports its Turkish-speaking and Turkic diasporas and communities abroad, but also because for the nationalist electorate and for those people actually who live in Turkey, most of them either conservative or nationalist or even of other political preferences and political parties, most of them support Crimean Tatars, and they call them even Crimean Turks, not actually Crimean Tatars. So there is this big cultural and even blood connection. That's why it's really important. On the other hand, of course, how we can cooperate with Turkey on that issue, there are several tracks of what we're doing. One of them is practical assistance, let's say like this, technical assistance, which we get from our Turkish partners who help Crimean Tatars to settle in the mainland Ukraine for those who had to leave their homes in the occupied Crimea. So we had a lot of projects going under TIKA coordination with this, which is a Turkish development agency. And just recently, during the recent visit of our president to Turkey, we signed a new agreement which envisions the building of housing units, about 500 housing units for the Crimean Tatars in Ukraine, in Mykolaiv, Odessa, and in Mykolaiv, Kherson, and Kiev. And that will be done by TOKI, which is a governmental agency in Turkey. And this is how we get this practical assistance. On the other hand, we cooperate a lot on consolidating international efforts. And here again, we're very grateful to Turkish partners because first we have this political support, we have declared participation and readiness to participate in the Crimean platform, which is a Ukraine-initiated international platform for joining international efforts to deoccupy Crimea. But also we see Turkey as an advocate in our communication, in our dialogue with other Turkic countries, with the republics of the Central Asia, for example, and with the Islamic world, because in those organizations, international organizations, even where Ukraine is not represented, but Turkey is, actually Turkey speaks on behalf of Ukraine and on behalf of Crimean Tatars and tries to work as a facilitator, negotiator for us. So there are many, many different tracks. And the last one, maybe also very important that I should mention, is Turkish-Russian dialogue. And this is rather dialogue between the two presidents of Russia and Turkey on the release of Kremlin's political prisoners, Ukrainian citizens, but mostly of Crimean Tatar origins. This is also a question which is always on the agenda on different levels and in different meetings between Putin and Erdogan, and we have success stories on that. So this is another way of practical assistance and help we get from Turkey on Crimean Tatars.
Thank you so much, Evgeny. That was a great comprehensive answer. Ambassador?
Yeah. Melinda, thank you very much indeed, and I appreciate the remarks just made. First, let me tell you in clear terms that the predicament of Crimean Tatars is not only a source of concern for President Erdogan. It's a matter for the Turkish society at large, because we have billions of Turkish citizens of Crimean Tatar origin living in Turkey. They are very influential people in Turkey, also in political life. Just like in the case of Abkhazians. I mean, we have people of Abkhazian origin 5 times more than those Abkhazians living in Abkhazia in Turkey. So we cannot simply rest on our laurels and watch that ongoing plight of those people. So it will remain on our agenda. It was on our agenda, and the Crimean War of the 19th century, I'm sure colleagues would recall it, is still alive in our minds. I mean, it's in our psyche. So we cannot agree with Russia on the situation the Crimean Tatars are facing on the peninsula. That is simply a non-starter as far as we are concerned. And we do believe, just like the Donbas region, Crimea belongs to Ukraine. And that's the bottom line, that they should enjoy their rights under Ukraine. And we were cooperating with Ukraine before Crimea was occupied and annexed on how to do things better for the Crimean Tatars over there. I went to Crimea on several occasions, and I was very comfortable speaking to the ordinary people out in the street. I mean, we are speaking the same language. There are these linguistic ties, historical ties, and we do not want to see them living under the Russian occupation. I mean, that's a bottom line for us, and not only for the leadership, but also for many segments of Turkish society, including but not limited to Crimean Tatars. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. I really appreciate your moral leadership and the very precise language you used on that question. Ukraine is really lucky to have such a strong ally. Question to Ambassador Herbst and Dr. Pavel. This is from Danila at VOA Russian Service. Erdogan, as Freedom House and many other NGOs suggest, has serious human rights and press freedom issues. Secretary Blinken often talks about the importance of human rights. What should be done by Washington to keep the balance between keeping Turkey as an ally and not compromising Washington's own principles? Maybe I'll send that just to John. And Pavel, if you want to jump in, feel free, but I don't want to get you in trouble. Go ahead, John.
This is not a simple matter, but I think the policy requirements are relatively clear. Again, Turkey has traditionally been a great geopolitical asset of NATO and the United States, and we would like to see that fully restored. At the same time, historically, we've also had problems with human rights practices in Turkey, and at times we have put them to the side. I think that's a mistake. I think we can raise them, make them an important part of our relationship, but not the critical part. So we urge the Turks to take steps on various issues where we're concerned. At the same time, we don't make those steps the only requirement in our relationship. And we seek progress. We don't necessarily seek full victory in this field. We are realistic about what we can achieve.
Thanks so much. Pavel, did you want to say anything?
Yes, I mean, it's understood that Russia doesn't give much about human rights, and that human rights are not an issue in Russian policy. Well, most many cases, yes, but not always, I would say. When this is human rights of pro-Russian actors are being infringed in Russian understanding, Russia can get rather vocal about that, like with Mr. Say Medvedchuk right now in Ukraine. And there have been very strong, very long-term connections between Russian different kinds of special services and Russian diplomats and the Kurds in Turkey, and not only in Turkey. These well-established links continue, and Russia has been and Russian institutions of different sorts have been very much working with the Kurds and supporting them. So human rights are not always alien to Moscow. When it suits us, we can use human rights too.
Thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate that. Last question, and this is from our good friend, Ambassador Richard Kozlerich. How can Turkey and Russia cooperate? And he says, be specific with the US to build peace between Armenia and Azerbaijan, or is the common objective to keep the Washington out? Ambassador Herbst, do you want to take that?
I don't have any doubts that Moscow wants to keep the United States out of the Caucasus. I think in the case of Turkey, they might be open to cooperation which suits their interests with us. And I think we both have an interest in limiting Kremlin influence in the Caucasus and promoting a stable, prosperous Caucasus, South Caucasus, which includes all three countries there. At least I hope this may be possible in the years ahead.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us. This was a fascinating discussion. If you don't read these analysts, please bookmark their names, write them down, read Pavel's commentary. It's really good, and it's in English as well. So have a look and definitely follow these four analysts. I really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you to our colleagues at the Turkey Center. I'd like to thank Andrew Deneri, Grady, Pinar, Peter, and Zainab. Thank you for joining us. And until next time, have a wonderful day. Goodbye.